have sympathy for that. In my work as a psychologist,
you'd love to get Sauron on your couch.
I'd love to get I have had Sauron on my couch.
Get the Kleenex boxes.
Things take a dark turn at Bag End as Gandalf returns and Frodo learns the truth about his inheritance and his Uncle Bilbo's ring. I'm psychologist Dr. Bryan Violette, host of the Catholic Sinner Show, and today I'm joined by Chris, the Loremaster, as we explore Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. So it begins.
So earlier today, you told me that when you learned that you would be a co-host for Chapter 2, Shadow of the Past, that you had a bit of a reaction to this. Because from your perspective, this is the most important chapter. If not the most important chapter, one of the most important chapters. Why do you think so?
You could argue that, the Council of Elrond chapter is just as important because this is kind of the this and that chapter are the they're the exposition chapters in the book. I mean,
Yes.
You've got stories within stories, and you've got the bedrock of the whole tale. I mean, the unexpected party. Or the long expected party, I guess. It's, it introduces some concepts, like it raises some questions. It's kind of like questions that need answering, and then the answers are in Chapter 2.
Yes.
And then like it does so many things. Chapter 2, it lays the bedrock for the whole story. You learn about the ring not as just a MacGuffin, but an actual almost an object with a sentient object unto itself, and you learn about one of the most central characters and arguably one of the most important characters, and I'm speaking of course of Gollum, not Frodo, not Sam, but Gollum. There's a couple of
I thought you meant Deagle.
Well, Deagle's an extremely important part in this, and it links, about the ring and Gollum. So it's just kind of how you want to get around to that.
Yeah. Well, for movie fans who never read the books, and you're just going film by film, you have to wait until Return of the King till you learn a lot of the history that's right there in Chapter 2 of the books. So if you're thirsting for that, history, if the movie leaves you with question marks, then the book, you get that right away. You get those answers right early on in the book. It's a big chapter in exposition. So when we say there is a bit of a bias here. So I was a history major as an undergrad. So I love Chapter 2 and I love Elrond, but it's a huge exposition dump. So readers that maybe want to be swept up in a narrative may not find it as exciting or as important.
Now, I think Tolkien knows this and he's aware of this, which is why I feel Chapter 2 is divided fairly evenly. On one hand, you've got the ring, and you've got the history of the ring, and the all the places that it's been, how it came into being, and whatnot, and where it is now. So that's one half, and then the other half is basically developing the character of Gollum, who is the story of redemption. I mean,
Sure.
in the whole thing. So I like and
or lack of redemption.
Well,
or saying no to redemption. Maybe we're gonna battle about this for a long time, but
it could be. I think the theme of redemption is not only present in Aragorn redeeming the whole race of men unto himself, but that's another story. But I think the redemption of Gollum, even if it were to seem non-intentional, especially in the movie, where he just kind of falls over the edge. There's no intent that he's just gonna, goodbye Frodo and jump in. I think that's another huge item. So I love how Gandalf tells the stories here, and and Frodo is like us, where he's the personification. He asks questions that need to be asked that we would ask, but other than that, it's just sit back and listen. So.
Right. Yeah. So there's a little bit in the early part of the chapter where you trace what happened since the party and what is ultimately 14 years later. So it's actually a 14-year chapter. Even though you zoom in on one conversation right at the end, which takes up most of the text, the whole chapter in time takes 14 years.
It does. It does. And I think it's important there too, that you get the sense there's two things, like when Bilbo goes away, the story's still about Bilbo. Frodo is just still this nephew. You don't know anything about him. You just know that he's Bilbo's nephew. He doesn't even have a persona of his own. He's Mad Baggins' cracked nephew, who's like, it's like the old relic or the old rustic kind of, well, he's his father's son, and sort of thing. He's just as cracked as his old man. And you get that. And
as an aside, I love the idea of Mad Baggins. I don't know why it struck me as so funny this time when I read through. It's like Santa Claus. It's like where the legend came from. He just disappeared when a Flash would come back with jewels and gold for the kids.
Exactly. Flash, pop, bang. Yeah, gone. So Frodo really kind of, he struggles with that, and it's just Bilbo's influence. But then you get actually a sense of development from Frodo. So he's you find out that he's kind of like Bilbo. He's thirsting for adventure, but he's kind of got a reserved side to him. He's like, no, not yet.
Is he though? Is he actually thirsty for adventure? Because this is my question. At least Bilbo's, I believe I asked it in the last video, which is Bilbo's take on Frodo was like, he's in love with the Shire. He doesn't want to go anywhere. But the moment he gets that ring, he's like, all right, these Sackville Bagginses, just leave me alone. Get me out of here. I miss Bilbo. Do you think that was the ring working on him?
Absolutely. And that was one of the points that I had actually noted, and that was that exact spot. Absolutely, it's the ring. If you look at Bilbo, let's just look at the ring in general as like the ultimate in evil. It doesn't take time. The thing is like, hobbits are resilient to the ring's power because it takes time to work its evil on them. Bilbo right away lied about getting the ring, so there's a sin, right off the hop. And he was deceitful, where before he was, an open book. Frodo, think about this. In chapter 2, Frodo is like, it's too bad he didn't kill Gollum when he had a chance. This is a hobbit.
He's big on revenge.
Urging murder. And he's had the ring now for 17 years and, he's urging murder. He thinks it's himself that wants to get away from the Sackville Baggins. The ring is already at work. The ring's like, all right, let's go east, and it's.
You know what I haven't heard talked about very frequently is that line at the end with Sam. And he says, if you breathe even a word of what you've heard, I hope that Mr. Gandalf will turn you into a spotted toad and fill the garden full of grass snakes. He wishes death on Sam.
In a horrific way.
Right. Can you imagine Elijah Wood saying that? That is book Frodo. He's no pushover and not as emo as Elijah Wood's depiction of the character. And that I could say like that to me that's in the same thread as wishing doom on Gollum. He's like, if you betray me, then I wish doom on you too, Samwise. Oh, best of friends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
Kind of terrible.
It is, and even when the ring first gets to Gollum, the very first thing that occurs when Gollum sees the ring, doesn't even hold it yet. It's just in its proximity, is he commits murder, and it's so much more graphic in the movie, in the extended edition, where you see him
those drums playing,
strangling. Like, I've watched a lot of investigative discovery on television, and I've watched a lot of Joe Kenda's The Homicide Hunter. Anyway, the worst crime of passion is a strangle. Because it's not like, you just lose your head and shoot a gun. It's not like
takes time.
You have to look, and people don't die in 5 seconds like they do in the movies. It takes time, and it's awful. So Peter Jackson using that you couldn't have picked a better example of the ring's evil, and how quick it can get to work. So
how do you account for the difference between the different characters' response when they first get the ring? I mean, there was a free will here, right? I mean, Bilbo could have stabbed Gollum. Smeagol went right to murder.
Mm-hmm.
So is that just personal? You think that's just personal free will, which of course Tolkien would allow space for?
So a couple of things here. The first thing I think is the ring. It's kind of like Gandalf says at one point in time, where the ring, kind of works according to the person's stature, and their natural kind of, their natural tendencies. Well, I found it really curious, and forget about Isildur for a moment. Okay. And Isildur is, losing the ring in the water, especially in the film, and getting shot.
I'm always quite happy to forget about Isildur.
Okay. So let's forget about him. And think about this. One thing, the history of the ring, every single change of possession of that ring has occurred with violence. Everyone, except for the last one. Except for one, when it finally found a hobbit. Isildur was killed and Gollum murdered, and etc. The other thing is, and this is a book specific version, hobbits, when they put the ring on, become invisible. Okay.
Yes.
Their natural ability as halflings, they
Sneaky.
get +2 on stealth checks. You know what I mean? Like they can become sneaky. It just enhances their own ability.
Furtive little squirrel-like creatures.
Tom Bombadil put that ring on, and he didn't disappear. It's not in his nature. It's not irrelevant. But I'm telling you, it's just a thing. So, and I think that's kind of an important little aside to the how the ring would react and just impart its evil according to the stature of the person.
Well, I also here you have the juxtaposition of Gandalf and Sauron, which it's a bit cliche to talk about the difference between the two of them for obvious reasons. But a subtlety that I picked up on this time was, so in the film, remember when he just even accidentally touches the ring and then the eye flashes? And then, but in the book, he actually holds it for a brief second and casts it into the fire. He takes it from Frodo. So he actually has it. Now, that might be a reflection of intention, but you think about the proximity that Gandalf has to the ring. Saruman, just the thought of the ring corrupts him. It wasn't just him with the Palantir and conversating, getting on his cell phone and talking to Sauron across Middle Earth. It was just, he said his pride grew with his knowledge of the ring. So just in thought alone, like with his stature, he was corrupted by power. His power corrupted his power. I thought that was pretty crazy. He never saw the ring, but he was corrupted by it.
I did, and that's a good statement on the nature of Saruman, and just he's always been prideful. Even going back to when he first came over and was named the head of the order, sort of thing. But no,
isn't that the whole problem with the ring? The ring is a temptation of pride. It's using power, wielding power at the expense of others.
Exactly. And it wants a powerful owner. It's sentient. I mean, it's not, when you pour that much of yourself into something, if you create a life, you're creating a sentient being. It's like creating a child. And so Sauron's baby is fully aware of who it is and what it wants. So.
But that's a good question. You brought something up before you used this word, and I was going to talk to you about it. I don't really understand how the ring is sentient in a way. Sauron poured his malice and spirit into it, and then in and of itself, it suddenly became sentient, like it wants to be found. Like, I think this was highlighted a bit more in the film, but a few times in the book, the language used was it betrayed him. It'll betray a trick of the ring before it moved on to its new owner. Like, it has a will of its own. What does that make? How does that make sense in the world of lore?
So think about this, and here's our first link. Here's our first link to Christianity, and just think about when God created, Adam and Eve, Old Testament stuff, and he took a part of himself and he put it into man and he put it into woman, and
he breathed the spirit.
He breathed the spirit into them. Yeah. So of course you see a parallel there, right? But I honestly think that and that's why Sauron was, a lot of people are like, well, if he gets the ring back, here's the old fantasy, if he gets the ring back, well, why is he invincible? He had the ring before and he wasn't invincible. They were able to cut it off his finger.
Yes.
That's the reason why he was, vulnerable, is because all that power that he had. You got to realize Sauron 1v1 like Fingon in the caves. He took on a lot of people and he won every time.
Sauron.
Sauron.
But 2v he couldn't take the 2v1 of Elendil and
The mighty men.
And what's the Elven King's name?
Gilgalad.
Not Elwing. Gilgalad, whatever. That's a movie difference too. In the movie, Sauron kills them, and then Isildur kills him by cutting off his hand.
Yeah.
No, they killed him. It was a mutual death, and then he cut the ring off.
That's right.
So everything you're saying about Sauron pouring his self into the ring, can you think of one other time that happened in the history of Middle-earth on a large scale?
Yes, when Feanor created the Silmarils.
I wasn't even thinking that. I have another one.
Okay. Was it the two trees, like the trees of Valinor, maybe? No. I don't know. Poured all of his skill. All I can think about now is Feanor making the Silmarils and why he refused, when they were requested. But go ahead, Bryan. Fill me in.
Well, this is when, in the Silmarillion, this is when we get real nerdy. In the Silmarillion, which is the Old Testament of these books, maybe we'll do Silmarillion reactions at some point. But in the Silmarillion, things were more explicitly religious, right? You had the creation narrative. And what you have here is Eru, who is God, the creator God. And he has, basically from a Christian standpoint, are all the archangels. And then you have Satan, who is the original Morgoth. And then you have all the archangels. You have Manwë, who is basically Saint Michael, and it's a replay of that. We know that Tolkien was explicitly Catholic Christian, and he drew inspiration from those myths. Mm-hmm. And one of the Eldar is Aule. And what was his great sin?
He created those dwarves. That's right. That's right.
He took his spirit and put it into the dwarves, which deeply offended Eru. Mm-hmm. And he repented of his sin to the point it was like Abraham in scripture, I'll destroy my son if I have to. Mm-hmm. Right. And then he didn't, because Eru stayed his hand, and then Eru blessed them and made them children of Iluvatar, like the elves and the race of men. But the dwarves are always a little off, right? Because
very true. Yeah. Yes. Excellent connection there. Yeah. No, that's and that was kind of the first mercy, right? The first instance of mercy in not even Middle Earth, in Valinor, or where the Pantheon were. No, yes. That's excellent. Yeah, I didn't think of that. No, but I guess that's a theme that reoccurs, because you've got the trees, you've got Yamana hallowing the trees, and or even where I think something else was hallowed, and Manwë, or maybe it was the Silmarils themselves. I don't know. It's been a while since I've read the Silmarillion, but Manwë did hallow the Silmarils. So, and there was another, poured all of his creativity, his knowledge, his crafting ability, and he crit, and out came 3 jewels.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You have this monotheistic idea of ex nihilo, which is like created out of nothing, and only God can create out of nothing. Like, and even Aole's response to Eru was, I was just trying to mimic my father, and like as a child does his father, and you created, and I know it's not creating out of nothing like you did, but I had to pour myself. And the dwarves initially weren't actually sentient. They were just extensions of his mind. So they were like puppets. But only when Eru, or God, gave the breath of life to dwarves that they became sentient in and of themselves.
And that's when they shrunk from the hammer. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Very true. Very true. Yeah. Because in the end, they were just like toys left alone until he came back to them, I think was the something of the wording. So,
yeah. Well, as long as we're talking about religion, I did have one question for you. So you see at the end of the chapter, you see Sam. Well, actually, at the beginning of the chapter, when he's at the Green Dragon, and then at the end of the chapter, you see the beginnings of his fascination with elves. Mm-hmm. And how do you see, like this? To me, this opens up Sam, a part of Sam, to like mystical realities. There's something transcendent or supernatural about elves from his perspective. And even on their own, elves are very deeply in touch with the Eldar, and one could say they're religious-ish, right? But you have that line from Galadriel, which always stuck out to me when she talks to Sam, when he said, "I'd love to see some elf magic," and she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. There's no elf magic." So that is a mysterious line. But I was thinking about it, and I wonder if it's like there's no real separation in Middle Earth from the natural and the supernatural. It's sort of just one reality. So there's no need for religion proper. It's all the way of things. And then later on in the chapter, another big part here is the encouragement that Gandalf gives to Frodo about Bilbo being meant to find the ring. And therefore you were meant to have it. And that's an encouraging thought. I could put it no more plainly than he was meant to find it. And that's just a statement on providence. Like, just the supernatural is just taken as a given. Even though it's slowly revealed. You know, it's kind of low fantasy, believe it or not.
But I agree with you 100%. And I think it's intentional. You know, but at the same time, you know, I'm going to make a statement here that you can pretty much, in this chapter, Gandalf urges Frodo, like, you know, to take the ring, you know, and he kind of puts it on. You can say that he made the decision himself, but at the same time, Gandalf several times said, you know, you have been chosen. Bilbo was meant to pass the ring to you. You were also meant to have it. Have you decided what you're going to do? And Frodo is essentially Jesus in this story. He takes the world's burden unto himself to save the world, you know? So, and a lot of people kind of wonder, well, if Frodo's Jesus, then what about Sam? You know, how does Sam fit in?
Well, there's a Catholic interpretation of all this. And that is that what Tolkien is talking about is not actually that these characters are Jesus. You pointed out earlier that, of course, Aragorn feels like an archetype, but maybe even Smeagol has it. Now you're talking about Frodo. Gandalf died and rose to life, transformed into Gandalf the White. So in the Catholic world, there's this principle of conformity to Christ. So in a mystical way, in as much as you die to self and grow in holiness, you participate in the Paschal mystery. So the Paschal mystery is Christ dying on Good Friday, rising on Easter Sunday. And that's like the fullness of time. It's like that's the moment in time that resonates in all directions throughout all of history. Everything is focused on that moment. And we are adopted into the Holy Family and are offered salvation by way of participating in that in a mystical way. So we all are called to be, I mean, to put it plainly, to be Christ-like. But in a mystical, supernatural way, we're called to become Christ, only empowered by grace to do so. We cannot do this on our own. But that's actually the story of all of us, of death and resurrection. And that happens in smaller ways, day to day, right? Or over the course of one's life, and like you actually die, and the belief is that you rise again. Mm-hmm. But that Paschal mystery, it's like an imprint all over. It's like I think it's Augustine that talks about how the Trinity is just imprinted on all of reality, if you have eyes to see it. The Paschal mystery of Christ is the same way. Like the world was created through the Word. Christ is the Word. The Father spoke the Word. And so Christ's imprint is everywhere. So all these characters in the book are, from Tolkien's perspective, from a Catholic perspective, are participating in that. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, I don't mean to personify, Frodo as I guess the only Christ. But at the same time, it's primarily his burden, where Sam, you see, like what I really like about the book, and you don't get it from the movie, because in the movie, Sam's a bungler, he's a bungle tongue. He just, he gets dragged in through the window and scared. And yes. But in the book, I mean, you look at what happened at the conversation in the dragon, right? And you find out that like Sam's a devoted son. As Matt loves Hamfast, right? Well, Sam's like so devoted to the fact that he's scarred for life from Hamfast's lessons and philosophy. But you find out he's a devoted son. He's a great friend. Because he defends Frodo. He admires Bilbo, so he's not afraid to, stand by his beliefs, even though they, mad Bilbo and whatnot.
He's deeply thoughtful and poetic. In the extended version, you get him telling that poem that he wrote in front of the company in Karis Galathon.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, they really give a lot of space to this poetic side of him, this artistic, creative, thoughtful, pensive side.
They do. And they actually make that comment. It's like, Sam was this, and I wonder if he's going to be this. And he's like, I don't want to be neither, and that's, I think, a quote. But he's also, he's also sociable. He likes people. He's friendly. He's obsessed with, the old stories. He's ready. He loves, he's curious about life outside the Shire, because he's interested in elves, and he'd love to meet elves, and and he's interested in these events, and he's dependable. I mean, the guy worries about what's going on with Ents and elves and dark folk. And then he's like, but I got a garden tomorrow. He's kind of, he's very, very much, I don't find him to be kind of a Christ main. He's more of like the everyman hero. Like he's meant to personify that ability.
But he is moved by love to suffer for his friend. That's very Christ-like.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the whole point of redemption is I'm willing to suffer for you out of love for you. So that's the eros and agape. And we talk about the Greek thought and in Christian thought, there's eros, from which derives like erotic love or desiring love, and then agape, which some describe as Christian love, which is more self-sacrificial love. But one of the popes, Pope Benedict, wrote an encyclical called Deus Caritas Est, which says that's all wrong. It's really one reality. God is love. In our finite minds, we have to break it down into parts, but God is love. Real love is a mingling of those two. If we have to put it in a sentence, I love you and want what's best for you so much that I'm willing to sacrifice for you. It's like you have a son. Now, is it ever actually difficult for you to suffer for your son?
Never.
Not for a second.
Not for a second. No.
Not for a second. Yeah. So that's what actual real love. It's that desiring love, which you're not pursuing suffering. That's just like agape without eros is just like duty, But if you fuse them and understand them as one reality, that's Sam to me. It's I'm willing to, like, whatever it takes. I'll go to Mount Doom. I don't want to go to Mount Doom,
mm-hmm.
but I will. Because I love you so much, Frodo.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing, and then there's the whole theme of redemption and like Aragorn's redemption of the race of men for the past. He feels those. He's embarrassed. 37 generations later, the fella's still embarrassed of his lineage.
I'm not ready to talk about Aragorn.
We'll get to him in a minute. But think about Gollum as well. The whole redemption story. Gollum is described. Now let's talk about Gollum. Let's talk about Gollum in this chapter. Sure. I don't know if that's where you were going to go, but
at some point, yeah, let's do it.
I feel like where's my section here? He is he's just introduced his whole character right from the beginning is first of all, it's created out of fear. I mean, what's your worst fear, Bryan? You have an infant child. Can you imagine waking up and your window's open and the child was taken from the cradle? And that's what is used to create like terror of this character. And in Jackson's movie, he's kind of a clown. He's
true.
more.
I thought that was a great literary technique that I wanted to comment on was. So from the perspective of the woodsman, he's just a boogeyman, right? From their subjective experience, he's not part of this larger narrative upon which the fate of the world rests. It's just like there's dark rumors of this boogeyman who will come into your windows at night and steal your child or eat your chickens. And, it's like, it's so interesting. Like the subjectivity, it like really highlights the subjectivity, just like in a future chapter. I don't want to steal the thunder of a future conversation, but the fox that sees the hobbits
mm-hmm.
walking through the Shire.
You love that part. I
love that. The fox is like, that's strange. 3 hobbits walking around at night. And he was right, but he never found out anything more about it.
No.
Like, you don't know, like, these larger events going on, but, you know, I said this in chapter 1, the hobbits have this strange hobbit sense where, you know, it'll like everything that happened with Bilbo and getting the ring and his agent and everything else as well. If they were like, well, it'll have to be paid for. It's not natural. Trouble will come from it. It's 100% true.
It's true.
But they don't know how true that is.
And I think another thing kind of along the same lines is, you know, you get introduced to Bilbo and you get introduced to Gollum, and it's just this fun game with this crazy creature in a cave, you know, and you know, Mad Baggins, I hate you forever. But there's other events in that book. Think about the trolls. You know, think about the whole episode with the trolls. And the trolls in The Hobbit are not like the trolls in Lord of the Rings. They don't push doors open. They don't have, or even the Hobbit movies where they've got like limbs that are morning stars and whatnot. They're just like, you know, it's all comedy.
They've got a -2 modifier to intelligence.
Bert, Tom, and Bill. But I mean, one of the first statements that's made in the book is that, you know, trolls are about, but they're not like, they're cunning and evil, you know. So right away it tells you this isn't the Hobbit anymore. Like we're in a much darker world. And I think Gollum's description. Gollum is described as, you know, he's just all like misery, woe. You know, he's twisted. He's messed up. He's got a curiosity of things that are hidden. He murders his best friend.
Yeah, but you know what's one thing that always interested me about the description of Gollum? And it's almost implied that it's inherently bad, but I don't know. I think you could argue that it's neutral. He was very interested in roots and the beginning of things. There's nothing actually wrong with that. That's kind of cool. Later it becomes, I can't look up at the sun, but always his head down. It's like, I think being interested in the beginning of things is fine. I think it's cool.
It is. I believe you. I believe you're correct. But also, Gandalf makes a quote later on that kind of refutes that, and he says something to the effect of, "Someone who breaks things to find out how it works has left the path of wisdom." I believe he says it to Saruman. You know, so if you need to worry so much about the origins, you know, about something, you know, just worry about its current state. You know, don't worry so much about, you know, like the creation or how it works. You know, don't take something apart and break it just to find out how it works. You know,
I don't know. I think we might have to disagree on that one. I don't think. I think it's apples to oranges, because I think that is a great quote about that Gandalf says to Sauron about destroying white, destroying that to find out. But I don't know that, like, Smeagol, before corrupted by the ring, who is interested in beginnings. I mean, think about this chapter. We're interested in exposition and beginnings. It's not inherently evil. It becomes twisted. It becomes, I'm going to hide in the misty mountains and find dark secrets there away from people. Okay, sure. But just in and of itself, I think interested in beginnings is fine.
I agree with you. And I honestly think, too, that it illustrates the fact that, here's another quote, nothing is ever evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so. That is a precise quote, you know. So
I'm so ready to talk about Sauron's psychology.
Okay, all right. Even the name, right? Like, you get introduced to this character. It's not like, and here's Bryan, or here's Chris. You know, we're not evil, but you hear and meet my friend Sauron. You know, like, even the name just right away. It's kind of one of those perfect names that. You know.
Yes. So Sauron is a Maya. Who's a lesser Eldar, right?
Yes.
He's like not an archangel, but he's an angel.
Yeah,
lesser Valar, right? The Eldar is the higher. They're like archangels. They're like, he's like one level down. Gandalf and the wizards were also Maya, and so were Balrogs.
Balrogs were spirits of fire. Yep.
Right.
Sorry, just gonna.
No, take your time. So the first time we're interested in Sauron's psychology is when Gandalf says. Well, Gandalf's talking about how Sauron would enjoy the suffering of hobbits. And he says, there's such a thing as malice and revenge. And then Frodo's like, revenge for what? I didn't do anything. And so Gandalf always highlights that Gollum is actually redeemable. But he never argues that Sauron is. But if we can get into the perspective of Sauron, right? So malice and revenge. So revenge is about attempting to rescale justice, to balance the scales of justice. So what harm does Sauron believe has been imposed upon him? And the second would be malice, which is to hurt others, which from a psychological standpoint, there's a lot of different ways you could describe that. Sometimes we hurt others in order to protect ourselves. Sometimes we want to, and this is probably more likely because it's reflective in the problem of the ring, it's prideful. If I put my others lower than me, then I am higher. And because of essentially my belief in myself as less than, that my value is based upon this comparative analysis of me and other people, right? So I can have sympathy for that. In my work as a psychologist.
You'd love to get Sauron on your couch.
I'd love to get I have had Sauron on my couch.
Get the Kleenex boxes.
Right. I have had, Gandalf is like, I am Sauron, or rather how he should have been. Like in terms of like archetypal, from an archetypal standpoint, I've had Sauron on my couch and I can relate to Sauron. Do you think I've never felt jealousy or wanted to tip the scales of justice into more balance or put myself above other people? Here's my hottest take of this whole show.
Okay.
The ring, which Gandalf describes as slowly, eventually wearing on anybody. Eventually, you won't be able to resist it. Tell me this. How is that different than PvP? Player versus player in video games is the most toxic experience.
Brian.
Hold on. It is, and I love it. Hold on. We got to talk about this. I might lose a lot of listeners right now, but think about it. What is the quintessential PvP game out there? It's got to be League of Legends.
Well, League of Legends, in terms of fantasy, or even any of the Tom Clancy, the
first-person shooters.
Exactly,
sure.
right?
Sure.
Kill, get those kills.
Have you ever met anyone that says, "I'm a better person for playing League"?
Oh,
everything I hear from people is, "I had to stop playing. It's toxic. It brings out the worst in me." And they might be addictive. They might still play. I've had periods in my life where I've been engaged in PvP. When I played Star Wars: The Old Republic, I was very deep into PvP. Mm-hmm. But it did become about me versus other people and defeating them, beating them so I'd feel better about me. And here's an incidental. I worked with an exorcist once. And I asked him about competitiveness. And he told me, Satan loves competition. And I was like, wait a minute, you're telling me that we can't be competitive ever? That's a sin? He said, no. But an important distinction or nuance is Satan loves it because you're basically like what I said, you're competing with someone and in the worst case scenario, in the Michael Jordan scenario, who's extremely competitive, right? I'm going to step on someone in order to win. I'm going to put them, there's no morality. It's winning as an end. Right. And you hurt other people, and whether it's actual in a competition or an internal competition within yourself, ranking yourself relative to other people, that's a problem spiritually and morally. That's very different than I want to exemplify God's glory, his omnipotence. I want to use the gifts that have been given to me, and I want to do the best I can with what I can do. And there may be moments when I'm competing against someone, and I want them to do the same. And at the end, there does happen to be a score. But actually, if I come at it from a spirit of I want to do my best and I want them to do their best, that's fine. So competitiveness in and of itself is okay. But when we go into Lord of the Rings and the pride of Sauron, of domination, he put his will to dominate in there. And of course, he's a pupil of Morgoth, who basically rejected God, Eru, in the song in the beginning, who was like, no, I want to do my own thing. I'm better than you. I can create out of nothing. I can do my own song. Of course, God just trumps him. He's like, nah, I'm going to take your song and make it into something better. Your cacophony of disharmony. But still, I wonder why does Sauron feel slighted? And why is he unredeemable? Or is he unredeemable?
I don't think he is. And I'll give you, evidence as to why. The end of the Silmarillion, after the Alcalabeth, the last battle, Sauron was brought to bay. And it was Eonwë, the Herald of Manwë, who said, "I can't pardon you. You're the same as I am. You're a Maiar. It's not within my power. You need to come back to Valinor with us and go before the powers and sue for pardon."
Yes.
And Sauron gave it some thought. It's not like he just said, "Screw that, man. I'm out. I'll do my own thing in Middle Earth. I'm out." No, he gave it some thought, and he left kind of in the middle of the night, and he went and hid himself. And but the reason that was given for that, and this is something that maybe you can explain, if there's a hierarchy in the demonology world, like it's something that but the bonds that Morgoth laid upon him were too strong to be broken. So even if he wanted to,
there's very little free will left, which is different than Smeagol. I love how Gandalf described it as there's still a corner of his mind that is still his own. The rest, there's a little bit of freedom left. The rest of him is absolutely bound by chains. Even when he left the Misty Mountains, he was going to pursue Bilbo, and it was like, nope, he was actually drawn by the will of Sauron to go towards Mordor. And so he didn't have that much freedom, but he had just enough. And you see maybe a little space for that freedom later on, which are going to be which are very difficult chapters from my perspective to read. Like the Frodo, Sam, and Gollum chapters are tough, but it's good because it makes you appreciate the other chapters. But there's a little space.
Endear yourself to them, Bryan. Take that and the thing that you dislike, and then just explore it. Eventually, you find out they could become your favorite chapters.
To me, it's kind of like fasting, or like a silent retreat. Or like it's just things I don't want to do that hurt, but it also feels good at the same time. It's like a blend. Like I know it's good for me to read those chapters, but there's still a slog,
Understood.
So anyway, what did you think about my thought about PvP? Which by the way, when we met each other, we played a game that had a very small PvP element to it. Lord of the Rings Online. Our friendship began over Lord of the Rings, and that's a game where it's about questing, being in the world. There's a lot of role playing. People connect with each other. There are competitive people, but they're not the majority. And it's us working together to complete a goal. And then they have a small PvP element. But the game, by and large, I think has sustained for as long as it has out of love for the text and for community and not competition. I mean, other games last because of competition, but people in that don't last. Right? Like the game lasts, but no one, I have actually, I'm sure Matt, the co-host for level 1, for our chapter 1, will comment on this because he still plays a lot of League and he's very good. But he has an emotional distance from it, but he'll admit that he becomes toxic when he starts playing. And I'll call him out on it too. And not too long ago, I went back to Star Wars: The Old Republic and played some PvP and didn't even notice it in myself, but I'd be in Discord and people would be like, dude, why are you so mad? It's like, so I think the ring slowly works on you. I think PvP slowly works on you.
I agree because I remember, here's the thing about me. Now think about this. I PvP'd in Lotro. I did on Marlbank the Champion. I was out there and, trying, but you know why I PvP'd? Because back then you got rewards that would help you in PvE. You got special jewelry that would, I could take back and I could help our group do instances and whatever. That's what really gave me the satisfaction.
Well, you started your possession of the ring right? Which is why it didn't have such a strong effect on you. Just like Bilbo started his possession of the ring from an act of mercy and pity. You had good intentions when you started PvPing, which is why you were able to pull yourself out of it. That's not true of other people.
My cousin, here's a good example because my cousin plays ranked League, and you've met him, at my wedding, and my cousin Ian, he's a gentle giant. We met. He is. When he was 10 years old, he introduced us. Unbelievable, to this day. But he is heavy into League, and you take this fellow who comes over here, and we're playing a board game or we're watching TV, and he loves to laugh and he loves to have fun, and I need help. He's there in a heartbeat, and then you listen to him while he's playing League of Legends.
He's like a different person. The Gollum comes out. Smeagol's
Oh my
gone.
goodness. I didn't, he's like, hey, you can watch my stream. I'm not watching that. I'm not, sorry, dude. Like I'll put you on mute and I'll have you on to support you as a viewer, but I'm not watching that stream. I can't. I mean, it's not you, but that's my take.
So if we see that PvP or the ring is a will to dominate, a will to power, and essentially the sin of pride, if the ring symbolizes pride, I thought we do get some Gandalf the Grouch, which I love always in this chapter. And I when he just totally insults Frodo, when Frodo's like, why did the ring come to me? Not because you're special, not for any merit that others don't have, not for power or wisdom. It's like
just found its way. Yeah.
I don't know, but he makes sure to like humble him. Like, don't think because you're special. Like he automatically like plants this wise thought in Frodo's mind that you're not special. Don't get involved in the will to dominate others because you're above them.
But Frodo needs that. Now think about this. Here's something to think about. So Frodo at one point is overcome by the whole notion of going on this quest, and he becomes just obviously uncomfortable with the whole notion that he's got to destroy this ring. Right now, is Frodo afraid for his life, or is he afraid to destroy the ring because it's already got a grasp on him? Is that the real fear? Because fear itself leads to, you watch another whole like sci-fi movie series, and fear leads to anger, and anger leads to aggression, and then you get murder. But in this, was it Frodo's fear of actually like, oh my goodness, I have to leave the life that I've known, I have to leave this simple lifestyle, and I enjoy being the Mr. Baggins of Baggin? Or is it my precious? I don't want to destroy my precious already. Has it already had a hold of him? That's
my sympathy for Frodo, I experienced a new sympathy from Frodo in his loneliness for the first time. Even when he sets out, he doesn't set out to save Merry and Pippin and Sam and Fredegar Bolger and the Gaffer. He's like, I'm setting out to save the Shire. It's very impersonal. It's very impersonal. And in fact, after a few minutes, he only then does he realize, oh, this might actually have interpersonal implications.
Or does he?
Because there's a line about like Tolkien writes about how he realizes that this is going to be messier than he thought. When Sam gets introduced to the equation, he's like, oh no, I didn't even think about this. Like Sam can't tell anybody. It's like, it's almost kind of like there's like a self-centeredness where he's not relational. And then what is Gandalf's advice to him? Like, don't tell anyone. The enemy has spies everywhere. This is your burden. Initially, Frodo thought he was going off on his own. Like, the poor guy. Like, it's a very, very lonely experience. He's kind of distant from everyone right from the beginning, except he had a love for his uncle.
But you are correct. And his uncle was a father figure, right? So once again, we come back to the theme of the Christ in Frodo. Did you feel sorry for Christ because who could know this burden, especially when he found out he would have to die, and have the faith that his father would raise him and that he would be the savior? And don't forget, this guy here, think about the wording. Outside of the Shire, the maps were blank. The Shire is his world. He's out to save the world. When he says the Shire, he means the world and all the little Bagginses and Boffins and Grubs and Chubs, everybody in it. So
proud feet.
Exactly. So I think that is a very interesting empathy on your part to feel sorry for him, because I reading the Bible, you can't help but feel sorry for Christ. I mean, he suffers so much, and he's got his disciples, but they can't know what he's going through.
It's true. That's a very good point. Yeah, I never thought about that. That's a really good point. So we have this chapter. It's pretty dark. It's pretty depressing. Frodo is frightened. He's scared. He realizes the magnitude of what's going on. He flips out when he realizes there's that moment of silence. Actually, there's a lot of dialogue. When we go back to the exposition of the chapter, Tolkien worked with what he could work with. It's not like there's this idea of the Pope in the pool. There's this movie which was like an espionage film, and then it was later used with like Margot Robbie talking about like the crash of 2008 in a bathtub, where it's like I'm gonna give you an info dump, which is kind of boring, but I'm gonna entertain you while I do it. So that's hard to do in a book. So basically, Tolkien's exposition here is just dialogue, right? He doesn't even give third-person narrative about what's happening between them or delve into their thoughts. He just gives you their conversation. But the break in the conversation is when they both realize that Frodo, Smeagol, Gollum went to Mordor. That's when the dialogue stops and it's like really quiet. And then it's like you can't hear Sam's clippers.
Shears anymore.
Right? Yeah. It's like, oh, wait, this is coming to my doorstep. And that's Frodo's realization, which was so dark and scary about this. But in classic Tolkien fashion, he brings you up at the end. So you can just hear Jackson depicting this with the Shire music. You know, hobbits are really amazing creatures. You know, and like that comes from Tolkien's words. The music fits perfectly. I don't want to always bash the movie. Jackson did a great job in many ways. And like that, like it pulls you out of the darkness of the moment to say like, there is lightness, there is light, there is goodness, there is hope. You find that all throughout. And then also in a larger way, you're never in a terrible place for long. Like I've never read a book before where someone would devote a whole chapter to rest and recovery. It's very much like the spiritual life, which is like you go through difficult times and then you plateau and take a break. Then God calls you to grow and it's hard again. And then you take a break. There's you know, the hippies wrote songs about this. There is a season, turn, right? That comes from scripture. It comes from scripture, which is like there are seasons to one's life. And he writes that right into his text, but in a miniature way. Even in this chapter, it's dark. And then you have like the affirmation of hobbits from Gandalf saying, this is amazing. After he faces the dark moment of choosing to take the ring, Gandalf's like, you know, hobbits are amazing. They can still surprise you after 100 years. And then he finishes off with the obvious comic relief of Samwise.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's adult. And twice. And here's the thing, you know, as a student of literature, you know, you numerous English classes. One thing you're taught in even like in high school is that if something's written more than once in a chapter, it means something. The author's trying to say something. And you know how many times that occurs in the book? First of all, Gandalf, you know, saying like, don't tempt me. And then he goes on another diatribe and then don't tempt me again. Even before he says that, he says, hitherto, mind you.
Hitherto,
you know,
mind you. Yes.
And Sam, twice in the last paragraph is, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. There's no Lord. I mean, it's just Tolkien pouring his heart out on paper. But let's just talk for a second about just how dark that chapter. And you know, it's kind of funny because I was listening to you and you were talking about Gandalf in your last episode and how he makes mistakes, and he admitted that he made a mistake, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Another thing is you know, this whole redemption and Gandalf's role. I don't see Gandalf as like God, but I see him more as kind of like a John the Baptist kind of thing. He's a prophet, you know. He's been there before Frodo and
lived in the wild, ate locusts. Yeah.
He is a mentor to Frodo. So one of the things that he does is when he's talking about Gollum, and he's like, I tried to be patient, I tried to be merciful, but in the end, I had to put the fear of fire into him. and you know, that's like, in the end, I had to tell him how bad hell was so he would repent and tell me the truth. That's what I got out of that. And there's so much of that in this chapter. There's just, you know, the fire and the ring and how it reveals the writing. There's fire in the line where he's, you know, Frodo kind of offers him the ring. There's anyway, his face is like, his face becomes lit, and you can see the fire in his eyes. Like there's so much symbolism there. You know,
with Gandalf, he had a flash in his eyes.
Yes,
when he realized he hadn't moved. There was a flash.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were talking about in the book about how, like Gandalf kind of grows in stature when he's like, Bilbo Baggins, and, he goes through that whole thing, and his shadow grows. Well, that's more of that, just the evil in this chapter, like you're talking about the shadow and the flame and even Gandalf, that's right after the whole, like, arguing about who's going to take the ring. Because you were saying something like, what if Gandalf killed Bilbo? What if it came to that? Like, and that there's a shadow in the room right there. It's like, that whole notion of whenever someone's fighting and there's fierce anger and there's hate pouring out, you can kind of see Satan's shadow in the background, sort of. Yeah. And I honestly believe that's a brilliant use by Jackson of. And another thing is, just think about it in the book. Gandalf, when he first gets there, he's described as older and more careworn. Yeah. In the movie, he's like, kind of, is it secret? Is it safe? And he's panicked, and he looks terrible. He looks like scared, and there's just so much good work there. I thought
I had to laugh out loud when he pulls Sam into the room, and Sam says, "I'm begging your pardon, but there are no eaves at Bag Ends," because he said, "Are you eavesdropping?" There's no eaves at Bag Ends. No, but what made me laugh was Gandalf's response. He goes, "Don't be a fool." He like screams at him. He's like, "Don't be a fool. What did you hear?" He's like, has no patience for like a word play or like the kind of sarcastic comment from Sam. He's like, "Don't be a fool." So grouchy Gandalf always amuses me.
I do get a kick out of that. Yes. Yeah.
And then you also have more of him, just the defensiveness, the pride, the ego. Frodo asks him, "How long have you known this?" He's like, "Known? I've known many things. Only the wise know." he didn't have to say that.
It's beyond you. Yeah.
But he could have just told him. Like, there was a defensiveness there. Like, don't question me part of him.
And that happens more than once. I don't have to explain my comings and goings to you. And I think he says that to Bilbo at some point in time. And
was it
or Frodo?
I can't remember now if this was Gandalf that said this, or I'm mixing IPs, or if this was the book, or it's not in the movie. But did Gandalf at one point say it's a habit of the wise to speak to the wisest person in the room? That's why I'm talking to myself right now. Did Gandalf say that, or am I mixing IPs? Who said that?
I'm not sure. I've heard the quote. I don't think it was Gandalf. I don't think it was him. I don't remember that quote. But it would be like him to say that, though. It would definitely. Yeah. But anyway, that kind of got me thinking about another thing that came up in your last. I don't know if I'm kind of segueing into the wrong area, but I was thinking about what happened in your last cast with Matt.
No, that's fine.
And it was all about, like, Gandalf is such a wonderful character in this chapter, in that, like, there's so much hope. There's all this storytelling, and there's he's capable of imparting great fear and peril and despair, but at the same time, like you guys were saying, well, he gives Frodo the ring, or he lets Frodo use the ring. Does he actually trust him with it? Does he? No. Well, and then I got to thinking too, is it's the same kind of thing as, like, did God trust Jesus to carry out his mission, sort of thing? Like, so it's kind of like, I don't know if Gandalf is on that level or on that plane, but at the same time, I think he had to have faith. He did say something like, I would have had to break him to do it, to take the ring from him. Like, I would have had to break Bilbo, and he probably would have had to break Frodo, and he would have had to do harm to people he loves. Mm-hmm. So I get it, but it's still, if this is the fate of Middle Earth rests on this one ring, then that is a tremendous amount of trust. It is. But I think, I think that comes out a one who, if you want to promote, obedience, then those who are promoting obedience cannot themselves rebel, sort of thing. So if you're going to have faith in the good, then you can't kind of decide up and then that you're not going to, and do some kind of harm. So that's
it's integrity. Else. Virtue is pervasive. You have the integrity to live what you're you're preaching, and it shows up in every area of your life and in your functioning. Gandalf certainly has integrity, no doubt about that.
Mhm.
One other thing that I wanted to talk about was whether or not in the books Sauron has a physical form.
Ah.
Because he doesn't in the film, and it's very Harry Potterish. It's like once he can get the ring, then he can have a body again. But that's never said explicitly in the book, as far as I can tell. And he even says like the shadow took shape again in Mirkwood, and would flee. And so there's a physicality to it. And I think actually in some of the deleted scenes in Jackson's film, in Return of the King, at the last battle, Aragorn is fighting a cave troll. But that was superimposed on what was originally Sauron, like an actual physical form of Sauron. So initially, I think that was like a later decision made to make him just like only the eye, because Jackson doesn't talk about him being an eye. He shares that Bilbo felt as if there was an eye watching him through the ring. But the tower with the lidless eye, he uses similes and metaphors to describe it being like a watchful eye, but he's not a physical eye, and he does have a body. Do you understand things the same way?
Here's my take on the whole situation is there's a reason Sauron is always referred to as the Shadow, because he can't take an actual physical form. When Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, when his vampire kind of just disappeared into a swarm of bats or whatnot. Yes. Same kind of idea. He could assume other forms, but his main form could not be assumed again after the falling of Numenor, when he sank with the island into the ocean and his body perished and his spirit fled. I think it's kind of a manifestation. It's honestly like, here's a kind of lateral is think about fighting a ghost in Pathfinder or D&D. A ghost is incorporeal, only can be touched by ghost touch weapons, etc.
Sure.
Similar idea. I take it to Sauron. It's just I think the immensity of the power of his shadow and his eye it's become kind of a meme, that whole Tower of Sauron. And it's another example of Jackson, whose tower is bigger, the Barad-dûr is bigger than Isengard for sure, and Orthanc. But I honestly believe that is the definition of the manifestation. When he showed him at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, when he was still in form, I think there was a reason why you couldn't see inside his helmet. Sauron's never had a face. It was just blackness, like a big giant body with a crown. Whereas here's an interesting thing. If you look for artwork on Morgoth, for example, Morgoth was never a shadow. He was a giant. He was at first, and then the fallen angel, assumes the form of a dark lord, dark and terrible and tall.
And he couldn't shapeshift after that.
No, he was trapped there, and he was trapped with the wounds that the Thorin, I think it was Thorondor, the eagle, gave him when he marred his face. And when that was the name of my elven arch character. Oh my goodness,
my elven archer hunter was Thorndune.
Thorndune, that's correct. Yes. Oh, yeah. The whole episode will have to be taken on the names of your characters. Some of those.
I used to pride myself in naming my characters well when I played.
Brimthelion. That was, I think, one of my favorite names. I think was.
Okay, so who won the chapter?
Who won the chapter? Gandalf, because he had us all in thrall. Not only Frodo, not only Sam, the reader. And the same thing in the movie. You couldn't take your eye off him. Ian McKellen was wonderful as Gandalf. I still just cringe at the thought of Sir Christopher as Gandalf. It's just I can't imagine him.
The actor, Christopher Lee, the actor who played Sauron, was originally going to be casted as Gandalf.
Yes, and I can't wrap myself around that. But no, Gandalf won the chapter, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, he's just.
It's a very good pick. It's like the Adam Sandler film. He's like, although Donkey Kong's a good game, I believe no. I could see Gandalf, but to me, just like I picked Bilbo for winning the chapter for chapter 1 because he gave up the ring ultimately, Frodo chose to take the quest upon himself. To me, that's the greatest moral victory out there. So for me, I have to give my nod to Frodo, even though I love Gandalf and he's way more entertaining. So I mean, I even have my Gandalf quote over here. I love Gandalf. Best supporting actor.
I would, since I'm giving my main vote to Gandalf, I would have to pick Frodo for exactly the same reason. I mean, it's for the most part, he's just a listener. He's just like us. He's just being entertained by these tales of the old, like, and another thing is this chapter is so wonderful. I mean, it's the first time they use the verse, right? Like, who are these three rings for elven kings, in the sky? And who are the 7 dwarf kings in their halls of stone? And why do men get 9 rings? Because they're the weakest and easiest to ensnare. That's why they get the 9 rings.
Yes. Meanwhile, one of the rings, spoiler alert, one of the rings is in the room.
Exactly. Right? Like it's
Gandalf, not the one ring, but Gandalf has one of the elven rings.
I really enjoyed your conversation in the first discussion in the first chapter about just the spirit of the ring and how that line, like one ring to rule them all. One, and think about this. It in my mind. You watch the Peter Jackson's movies and you watch The Hobbit where, like they actually say it, but you got to think about it in Catholic terms. You've got this evil Lord and it's not so much as a declaration, it's a chant, one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them.
Yes.
One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Repeat. It's evil. It's an evil incantation.
You can almost hear orcs marching and chanting that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of power in that kind of point of view. If you
terrifying.
Bring that in. Yeah, it is
absolutely terrifying.
And another thing too is that I got to say, underneath all this, maybe I'm an old soul, but the book was written in the 1940s, like 30s and 40s, and published in the 50s. Our view as humanity has changed so much since then. Like the word God-fearing was real. Like it still is in some places more so than others, but at the same time, things like this would have been terrifying, in the 1950s and 60s. Like think about this, like a dark lord and a creature that stole children from cradles. We make fun of a dingo ate my baby, but this is like
we've been desensitized.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I might even give my best supporting actor to Sam.
I wouldn't argue with you.
He cracks me up at the end there. He's pretty funny. He was stuttering and stammering and just making these little quips, and just totally inspired and fired up to go see the elves, which is great, which I think is his own personal opening to the spiritual realm. So I loved Sam.
There's a lot of emotion in this chapter too, like differences in emotion from Gandalf, from Frodo, there's some heat from Frodo, and then there's some acceptance and whatnot. But even Sam, that one line in the book, it's like, me going to see the elves, Lord have mercy. Yeah. And then he bursts into tears. It's like he's so happy, but he's crying, an emotion usually associated with sadness,
tears of joy. He definitely wore his emotions right on his sleeve. So I did want to give you a chance before we end here. And I have one more question after this, but
sure.
I wanted to give you a chance to refute, because you pushed back privately with me, refute the idea that hobbits are overrated, which was my whole thesis of the first chapter. Why are they not overrated? Just for our listeners who may not have witnessed the first chapter, let me give you the quick synopsis of my argument. It's not that hobbits aren't great, but in Jackson's depiction, they are placed on a pedestal with elves, and he places the blame of the fall of Middle Earth and the succumbing to the ring on men. Whereas my argument is there are great hobbits and there are terrible hobbits. Like Smeagol is a terrible hobbit. There are bad elves, there are bad dwarves, there are bad men and good men, and there are great men. It's not just like I don't want to get into Aragorn because I'm passionate about his character in the books, but even Aragorn in the film is like someone that doubts himself and he's just weak and he has to overcome the failings of his race. In the books, he's like, I'm the king of Gondor. Like, come and get this. There's no self-doubt in Aragorn. And Tolkien's depiction of men is there are great men. So my whole point was like, it's not that I'm anti-Hobbit. It's that they're not the greatest race. Now, did you have a reply?
I do. And one thing I will suggest is that you reread Aragorn's parts in the books. There is so much self-doubt in Aragorn. He struggles with it, not as obviously as in the movies, but it's definitely there throughout.
But not about his identity as the king of Gondor.
No, but he doesn't want to reveal his identity until the time is ripe, which is fine. But in the books, you are correct. He's depicted as he's reluctant to accept his identity. He's reluctant to accept who he is. Elrond has to prod him to, in the movie. Where Elrond's like, become who you were meant to be, become the king of Gondor, and whatnot. But
if you get to the appendices, I don't want to do too much Aragorn here. I want to save it, but in the appendices, like he's like just out in the wild, and then he falls in love with this elf maiden, and then Elrond's like, all right, fine, you can have my daughter, but only if you're the king of Gondor. And then from that point forward, he's like, all right, let's get it.
So I'm going to do this quick kind of juxtaposition with this, or actually, it's.
I may edit all of this out because it's
you
so
might.
Good
okay, but it's true. But just as a theme, I mean, that's not the first time that an elf lord has ransomed his daughter for a physical object like a scepter. Baron won Luthien's hand because he had a Silmaril in his hand, so it's kind of a recurring theme, history repeating itself, the race of man making the same brave, overcoming all odds and claiming the impossible. So I'd say, in that case, you got to be a fan of man because of the resiliency. However,
you don't think I'm going to place that same kind of burden on whatever suitor tries to marry my daughter?
Right?
She will settle. I will settle for nothing less than the king of Gondor for my daughter.
Oh my goodness!
But hobbits though.
Yes.
You don't think they're overrated?
No, I don't, because I don't think they're overrated at all. I think they're supposed to be endearing. They're supposed to remind us of the best of ourselves. They're supposed to remind us of that guy who just works on his farm, brings in his crop, comes into town, goes to the pub, smashes a couple down when the crop's done, marries his daughter off to another successful farmer, and the cycle goes on, and humanity, procreates, and they live in a utopia. The Shire is a utopia. One thing I will disagree is you're like, the hobbits are afraid. Hobbits aren't afraid. They're ignorant. And in this case, ignorance really is bliss. They're not really afraid of what the hell goes on out there. They're in their own little perfect world. And it's just like, They feed off the rumors, and they're rumor mongers. And they feed off of this because in a utopia, life is boring. It's just one crop after another. It's the pumpkins. It's the family history. It's that's in my opinion, it's rustic.
My rebuttal is the person of Ted Sandyman. He's a terrible person, and he's a hobbit.
He's troll.
Terrible.
He's a troller. We have them in our society. He's just trolling Sam.
But that kind of trolling of hurting other people cannot exist in a utopia.
He doesn't hurt Sam though. He's just kind of, he says he saw it. Well, there are no elm trees up in Northcott. Well, then he couldn't have seen one. I mean, that's not hurtful.
Who's the hobbit later on that just like aligns with Sauron?
Oh, that's Lobelia's son.
It's not Ted Sandyman?
No. Well, he sold his mill, and I think his son was enslaved because the mill got made over into something. But it was Lobelia's son. He's in Brockenborings in Lord of the Rings Online. He's in the inn.
Well, whatever. Still, anyway. There is an openness to that which is evil in Hobbits.
But here's the thing. In the end, if you read the chapter, The Scouring of the Shire, it explains his dilemma, where at first he thought this was kind of funny and he's just going to get a joke out of it. Then he realized the whole thing was out of his control and it went too far and people were going to be hurt. But by that time, it was too late. He was already it's kind of like, he's put his hands in it now. He's, and he eventually died. That was Lotho Baggins, Sackville Baggins. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But other than that, I just think that they represent the race of humanity. I mean, we're all just, we, in order for us to continue our plain old existence of, drinking beer at the Dragon and farming the land and good green earth and good tilled earth or whatever that smell is, we need that savior to take up this ring and go destroy an evil.
So you have no issue with the gossiping. You have no interest in the rumor mongering. See, I see
it's
those
just a
as
small
flaws.
town, man.
That's the problem. That's Gandalf's argument to all hobbits. That's his argument to Bilbo. It's like, there's a whole world out there, and you're just going to hide in this one. That's why I think from a psychological perspective, there is fear that drives the hobbits at a deeper level.
Gandalf also says, wouldn't it be terrible if all of your stupid, and he uses that
ridiculous.
word
stupid and ridiculous
Greyskirtles and Hob and Proudfoots, and then he says, and not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses. So he knows enough to kind of he just brings them down. They're human. They're sinners. They're just like everybody else.
Yes. That's my point. They're sinners just like everybody else.
But do you not think that do you think humanity is overrated? Because that's exactly who I think Tolkien is describing here, is just the general public, the English people who lived before World War I, who were exposed to that terror and horror, who just were like simple tillers of the land and the beginners of but prior to the Industrial Revolution, I think that's who he was the hobbits are personified by. There's a whole other chapter I'll get into you later about me thinking that the elves are actually like First Nations people. And there's some parallels there, but that's something for another discussion.
That's what I was going to say is I think the Shire folk represent a certain subsection of human beings for Tolkien that he lived among. So it's easy for him to write about them. But I think humanity is spread across all the races, for like elves, men, Shire folk, dwarves. I don't think it's like humanity is encapsulated only in hobbits. And yes, human beings are fallen and are capable of wonderful, great things. Human beings are powerful and wise in some cases. And other times they're simple and childlike, like hobbits. But even a child, like from a Catholic perspective, we have first confession for children when they're I think
grade
around
3.
7-ish.
7 or 8. Yeah.
7 or 8. Right. So once you hit the age of reason, you're held accountable. My son was making bad choices today. So, but there's a beauty and an innocence and childlikeness to him and a goodness about him that we associate with him, but he's just perfect. Being a child is a little overrated. They make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
true.
That's my principle for the hobbits.
I didn't mean like an overarching, but you've hit upon the pattern. But at the same time, are you a fan of the underdog? Because I think that's another thing that the hobbits are. By their very nature, they are half men. They are halflings. Sure. They're children. Even they would look like children in your eyes. Aragorn uses those words to describe them to the Rohirrim. I don't think that's an accident. You know what I mean? I think they're just meant to be treasured and they're precious and they're so innocent in their they're carrying big pumpkins around and they're sleeping next to pigs. You know what I mean? They don't know any better. So,
no, I'm with it. All that stuff all day. That to me, that stuff is made very explicit. And that's always been my take on the hobbits, that they offer out of love for each other a goodness that is able to resist the ring. There is an innocence and a purity to them that's wonderful. I'm just saying, stop doing the race of men dirty. There are good men and bad men, just like there's good of every race. That's my only argument.
It's just part of the tale. That redemption story. It's a wonderful thing. Here's another thing, Brian, is just kind of my own opinion is, I read the Hobbit and I read the Lord of the Rings when I'm like 13 years old. I stole my uncle's copy. It was falling apart. It was this big, thick book. It was
so your possession of this began with a
theft, but it was in his own house. So I just kind of snuck off to his, the room and kind of started reading. But at the same time, I didn't examine it as a work of art. I didn't examine it from a literary or religious perspective. But now that I have the wisdom to do so, some people think that's diminishing the quality of the work. To me, it just opens my eyes to so much more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's one thing too, and this is you know, an ode to our faith. Is it's one thing too to examine a book on literary merits only and discover, you know, alliteration and the repetition, you know, the importance of that. It's another to actually realize that what the author is imparting is not allegory, it's faith. You know, and it's sharing his faith and his love and his. Tolkien said it himself. He said, others may find this book boring or you know, absurd, but this is the way I feel about things, and I think that's just wonderful. You know, it's part of the reason I fell in love with the whole thing. So
I think all the great artists take that perspective. You know, it's even musicians. People ask them what a particular song is about, and they won't even comment on it. Like, no, that's up to the person participating in the art, the listener, or in Tolkien's case, the reader, to interpret that personally. But this is my perspective and this is my art. What it means to me is sort of irrelevant, because the moment you experience it, you make it your own. And I think in Tolkien's work, there's something subjective about it, but it speaks to objective, transcendent truths, which is why no matter, like, we can't get rid of this story. It's going to continue to perpetuate in popularity. I mean, the book was written how long ago, and we're doing a podcast on it.
Right.
And they're still making TV shows about it.
They're making new movies.
Yes.
I have reservations, but we'll talk about that another time.
Yes. Okay. Lastly, tattoo.
So I got a great idea, and I'm going to do it. I swear I will do it, and I will probably do it within the next year. From this chapter, I always wanted to get a ring tattooed. I did. It's just my fear of needles and the discomfort of that. But I always wanted a ring tattoo on a shoulder or something like that, just with the words flaring. Not just like but with the words flaring, you know, like kind of when they first get revealed in the movie, you know, sort of thing. So that would be, I think that moment where I get a tattoo of the ring in Frodo's hand, or you know, where the fire first becomes legible. I think that would be a great tattoo to have. On a personal note,
where would you get it? Where would I get it?
Someplace where it would be seen, but not outrageous, I guess.
Would you want Frodo's face? Like, I've seen a tattoo, like in the movie posters, of him sort of reaching towards you with Elijah Wood's face with the ring in his hand, like that, or just the hand?
Maybe. I don't know if I could do a palm, because then you have to shake everyone's hand and you're giving away that ring. You know, I don't want to give away my ring. But maybe on the shoulder, you know, or a calf, or someplace where it's going to be a visible, you know, some time of the year, you know, but it's not unprofessional. Yeah. Another thing that I saw that was wonderful that I'm going to get done is a friend of mine had the Tolkien speech translated and just reordered into the names of his children. And he's got them around his wrist. And I thought that was brilliant. So I think I'm going to get, you know, my son's name put on me somewhere in the script, you know.
That's really cool.
I think that's a definite lasting keeper. So.
Yeah. Tattoos are tough because you want to have something that you're not going to regret later. You'll never regret that. Ever.
No, ever.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. For me, there wasn't a lot of imagery that stuck out to me that I would want tattooed on my body from this chapter. I think maybe I don't want to do faces. I would never want to do faces, because I think that sort of cheapens and interprets the character, like it interprets the art, just like an actor would. Yep. So for me, I think like I would like maybe want like a fire, and like Gandalf and Frodo sitting in chairs facing each other, but silhouettes, and
just kind of leaned over. Yeah.
Leaned over, and the fire coming from behind them.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
And I maybe on my back, or maybe right here. You know, one thing I didn't actually talk to you about, which I wanted to talk to you about, was you see this over and over again in the books, which is that there are some topics that should not be discussed in the dark or at night.
It's true.
And the conversation between Gandalf and Frodo begins halfway through their conversation in the text. Frodo's like, you were saying some things to me last night about a Dark Lord and a ring, but you said we should talk about it tomorrow. This also happens in Tom Bombadil's house later on. And like, what do you make of that? How do you like, what is the internal internal consistency of
I think
almost the magic and the power associated with telling dark tales in the dark. Even the Nazgul, like Aragorn says, like, no, their power is not on like coming after you. It's like it's in terror and darkness and stealth.
It's the personification of that shadow, like I said, like Sauron is always described as the shadow and darkness. And, like we can go to the film, like I said, the big projection of Gandalf up on the walls, this gigantic dark shadow. I don't think that's an accident. At the same time, it's like, the book is good versus evil. It's an old fashioned book. It's the forces of good against the forces of evil, and God versus Satan. And it's a good old fashioned tale. And I really think that the light is associated with the good, and the darkness and the shadows are associated with the evil. How many events have happened because look at the ride of the Rohirrim coming down the hill to save Helm's Deep, and the sun rising behind them.
The imagery. Yeah.
And the sun rising behind the Rohirrim as they come to the aid of Gondor and march across the Pelennor fields. I mean, it's light. It's the dawn.
Darkness,
yeah. So I think that's a fair assumption.
As you're talking about Gandalf there, I couldn't help but think of the D&D spell enlarged person that Gandalf casted. And just so during the last episode, I talked about like how the charm person spell was casted. It's like so much of fantasy, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or like just implicitly was at least borrowed from Tolkien's world. Dungeons and Dragons directly, but World of Warcraft, Game of Thrones, like all of it is this man, it comes from this man's imagination.
Harry Potter. It's no joke that Karkaroth is the name of the leader of the boys' school. Like that's directly taken from the beast, from the Silmarillion, and the Dark Lord and the Savior, who has to die.
Dementors are kind of
Dementors, the ring wraiths. They make everybody feel unhappy and terror, and it's everywhere, and it's in modern society. And I think one of the things that I find, this is a personal opinion, but I find difficult is you read on the internet and they're all like, Tolkien was hardly the first, and he wasn't this and he wasn't that. It's like, but then you get chapter 2 and you get tales within tales, and he was one of the first to incorporate that into high fantasy, where you're not only in a story, and he says it at one point, I wonder if we're going to be part of the old stories, Mr. Frodo and all that. It's like it's already there. You're a tale within a story, it's
so meta. We're reading Tolkien, who is writing about, depending on which author you're at, it's either Sam's book, Frodo's book, or Bilbo's book. So we're reading that, but it's in that. And in that, they're talking about stories. And then you can even kind of keep going backwards. Like we are in a tale ourselves of like salvation history and like the beginning and the end of things. So I was saying how like Tolkien was kind of the one of the pioneers in terms of narrative psychology. Narrative psychology is this idea that your life is a story, and it helps people who are at a point of despair in their lives, because it's as if it's the end. But if you see it as, this is a chapter of difficulty that I need to endure, then it really opens up vistas for possibility and choices in your life. Like Tolkien was on that. He was aware of the narrative nature of our psychology, and it could write books within books within books. So I love that. He'll always be inspirational to me.
Absolutely.